I recognize the Honourable Dr. Samuel Joseph.
Good day, Madam Speaker, and members of this Honourable House, and to all of those following this budget debate. I rise today to give my thoughts on this Appropriation Act 2018. But before I start, Madam Speaker, I would like to say a few words in general about the overall impressions of the debate on the country. You don't have to worry, Madam Speaker, I have not allocated myself 3 hours. I will be short and concise and do what I have to do. So there's no need to fear. But we're in a situation where we have produced a budget for Montserrat. And we're in a situation where we have a Westminster political system, where we have a government and an opposition as dictated by our Constitution that basically lays out how the operations of government function. So we have a government and a cabinet that makes certain decisions on behalf of the country. They put numbers together, they negotiate on our behalf, they bring laws to our parliament, etc. In our Constitution, we have provision for a parliament in the interest of transparency and accountability to question some of the things that the government are doing, bring certain things forward. And this is the system that we have, and we must understand the reasons for it. We cannot be in a situation where we believe that if the government proposes something, or there are members of the government that propose something, and members on the opposition question it or make certain points, or to say that this point is not right or this policy is not right, that is some personal agenda, or that they have something against you. We have to move beyond that kind of childish behavior, and we have to grow up in our political discourse. If statements are made, it is the right of the opposition to question those statements, and for the public themselves to hold the elected members to account, whether they're on the government side or whether they're on the opposition side. If you're elected, you're here to represent people. So we have a budget. And there's certain items that were placed in the budget, and there were certain statements that were made by the members on the government side that needs to be clarified, because there seems to be a policy, or maybe not a policy, but an attempt to bamboozle the public about what's actually there. So it is up to us, the opposition, to come and point this out. So we have a situation where we are doing the same thing over and over again, and we're expecting different results. And that's the very definition of insanity. Insanity, as one person says, is doing something over and over again and expecting these different results. Some people might say, no, you know what, it's not really insanity that they're testing a hypothesis. But may I suggest, Madam Speaker, if you've been doing something for 4 years and nothing has improved, maybe it's time that some change is made. Maybe it's time for the members in the administration who make decisions on our behalf to try something different. So the topic for our debate, and the topic that the Premier's speech, as he articulated on Monday when he spoke, advancing our journey to self-sustainability to strategic investment. Advancing our journey to self-sustainability to strategic investment. That was the theme of his budget, so I'm going to make that the theme of my presentation. The difference is that I'm going to add a dash of reality to the conversation. But after listening to some of the presentations yesterday and the day before, it seems that we might need more than just a dash of reality to be added to the presentation. Before I continue, there's two words I want to leave, 2 phrases. One of them is the Gish Gallop, and it's a logical fallacy where one member on the debating side says so much arguments, so much, I don't know if I could use that word in Parliament, so much nonsense, one behind the other, in order to overwhelm the other side and force it to respond to these statements, whether that they are true or not. The other phrase that I want to leave to the audience is something called a strawman fallacy. That's when you invent something that the other side has said, and you argue against it, pretending that the other side has made these statements. The opposition so far has made absolutely no statement about the budget, whether on radio, whether online, whether in public. No statements has been made on the budget. But I heard a lot of statements yesterday from the government side, or the opposition said that, the opposition said this, and I was not sure which opposition are they referring to? Is it the internal opposition in their government, or was it the formal opposition on the other side? So some clarity will need to be given by the Honourable Premier in his response on Tuesday. Which opposition were they talking about? There's also a lot of talk about unity and working together. And that's something that needs to be addressed, because to get our country to go forward, there has to be some unity of effort and some unity about working together and some unity of plans, etc. Nobody is discounting that. The issue is that, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary entitled his speech yesterday unapologetic. So I was wondering if I could entitle my speech Hypocrisy. When we have a situation, if you're saying, what does it mean to say work together? The government is saying that when they have meetings, are they going to invite the opposition to those meetings? When trips are given to go overseas to represent the country, instead of they going, are they going to ask the opposition to go? When they have pre-cabinet, are we going to be invited to those meetings? When officials from the different aid agencies, whether the EU or DFID, etc., come to the island, are the members of this honourable opposition of this House, will we be invited to those meetings? The Honourable Osborne has been in office from September, October, and at no point has this opposition been invited to any of those meetings. The only thing that we are invited to is formal opening ceremonies, etc. So when we have calls of unity and we're trying to bamboozle the public, that is the opposition fault why such things are not happening, these are words. If they're serious, if the Honourable Osborne is serious about such things taking place so that we can move the country forward, I'm imploring him that in the future, just do not talk about it, but actually make an effort to include the opposition in the debates and in the discussions so that things can go forward. So that we do not come back here in the next sitting of Parliament to hear this same speech over and over about the call to unity and the call to working together. That's what unity means. It does not mean to just use the word because it's politically useful to try to say why things are not happening, why it's the opposition fault, why removing the blame from the people that are actually in the government and are responsible for taking the country forward. Cabinet, again, make the decisions, as the Honourable Premier yesterday pointed out to one of his honourable members, and I was very proud of that fact, because we have a situation where we keep talking about unity. So there's a limited amount of funds available in our budget, about $160 million. Those funds have to be allocated in a certain kind of way. I assume, I'm only assuming, because that's the way I would have done it, that the Premier would have met with his ministers, they would have submitted their proposals, they would have some discussions, and some members would have to give up certain things so that other members gain those things, because in the end we have to balance our budget, and we only have $160 million. So only a certain amount of money is available. So you've entered a cabinet meeting, you've come to a decision that this is the budget that we are going to bring forward to the public. So it is very strange when you're seeing members on the government side getting up and complaining that they don't have enough money, asking the FS, etc., for things that they want to do. When, by the way, it's not the FS that allocates money, but that's a clever political trick again, to move blame away from their inability to raise more revenue or their inability to get more funding and cast it upon somebody that actually have absolutely nothing to do with that, and that needs to be pointed out. So you have come to a decision about how money should be spent in each department. That decision is made. I would expect that when you come to Parliament, there will be a unified, which is the word that's being used, discussion about why we agreed with this money, what was the reason why the Hopnit plant wasn't given to the Minister of Education, why is it that $500,000 were allocated here, and there's some unified approach to how the government expects to move its thing forward. You cannot be in one end calling for unity from the opposition when you're directly in your speeches, etc., directly contradicting what you agreed on in cabinet to make your very specific ministry looks good, because it's not about the country. Sorry, madam. We have to be very careful that the things that we do are about the country and is not trying to make our specific department, not our, since I'm not in the government, look good just so that we can get re-elected. The way how we allocate our spending and our money has to be for the benefit of the country. So there's this talk about unity, but as I said, maybe I should entitle the talk of my presentation today, Hypocrisy. Advancing our journey to self-sustainability through strategic investments. How are we going to do this, Madam Speaker? We cannot do this by repeating the same thing over and over and expect by some magic that will happen. That will only happen by decisions that are made, how money is allocated, how money is spent. And since we're talking about investing into strategic investments, it will be prudent for me to look at how actually is the money invested, what were the activities that the money was allocated to, and would that take us towards self-sustainability, since that was the stated goal of the budget speech and the stated goal of the theme. That's the word that we hear a lot, self-sustainability, etc. Before I continue, I must congratulate the Honorable Premier and his Minister of Social Services, because we must also understand that the development of a country is not only roads and bridges, etc., but it's also about people. So it was good to see that a lot of that was reflected in the budget, because according to the Honorable Premier from his budget speech, and I'm going to just read part of it, a project to be implemented later this year, which seeks to provide sanctuary home facilities or safe houses for persons subjected to or fleeing violence and/or domestic abuse, accommodation for the safeguarding of children and young people, supporting and transition housing units for ex-offenders, including deportees who are released from prison and have no place to stay. So I cannot continue without first congratulating the Honorable Premier and his Minister of Social Services for pushing such projects forward. And I sincerely hope that it's not just something in a document and that the money is actually available, and that by the end of the financial year that this project will be implemented, plus certain of the other things that the Minister of Social Services mentioned, which I'm going to get to when I get to her department. What I would have also liked to, there was some discussion about the legal framework, and it would be useful. It is a legal framework for medical professionals, etc. How do they get to practice? What are the criteria for removing them to practice, etc.? Because these are issues that affect the development of a country. Sometimes we get caught up in the fact that the development of a country is only the external things that we see and not the internal things that, some of the things that we actually do not see. The people themselves are the ones that are going to have to do it. And the people themselves will have to come to some understanding about what it takes to move the country forward and move part of some of the bluster about, yes, we did some verge cleaning, so we are investing in strategic investments. That's just something that normally happens for the functioning of a country, and it does not change anything fundamental about moving the country forward. And there has to be some talk about the mentality, as the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary was mentioning, of our people at some point has to change. So if you look at the situation with Larry Nassar of Michigan State University, who was given 175 years for the abuse of the gymnast, what came out from it is that there was around him, the structure was such that he was protected about those that are around him. So we would like to see, again, going forward, laws and legislation that not only deal with the person that perpetrates such crimes, but the system around it that protects and cause such things to go forward. So, the other thing that I was pleased about when I listened to the presentation on Monday is that there was the phrase first call wasn't used or any such similar phrases, and that was good to see. So it does seem that there's some realization, at least maybe the previous past was not the way to go. I'm not saying that our donor agencies and the UK does not have a responsibility, and I'm not saying that we should not hold them to that responsibility and have lobbying efforts to get them to do which they're mandated to do by the UN Charter and other things because of just moral obligations, etc. But the idea that we are now discussing self-sustainability and investments and strategic investment was a good thing to see, that it was not a prominent part or it was absent from the speech that was done on Monday. So it does appear that the opposition, the speaking that we're doing from the opposition, is having some effect. And there are other effects which I'll mention later when I get to the HYPE youth program. Madam Speaker, I also understand that the job of a premier is not an easy one. Everybody is looking to you for leadership. Everybody is looking for you to solve all their problems, etc. And I understand it must be very difficult for him when he has a hostile cabinet. But, Madam Speaker, this absolutely is no excuse for mediocrity, and it's also no excuse for not getting things done how they should be done. Because if you realize Montserrat is a sunny place, but if you go around the community, etc., you realize that the clouds of despair are starting to roll in. And, Madam Speaker, the people of Montserrat deserve better than what was presented in this budget. Total recurrent revenue, 131,151,300. Budgetary aid, 78,462,000. Local revenue, 50,380,300. Salaries, wages, allowances, benefits total 59,856,500. Let me repeat those numbers and pay special attention to the local revenue, salaries, wages, allowances, and benefits. So the total recurrent revenue is 131,151,300. Budgetary aid, 78,462,000. The local revenue, 50,380,300. Salaries, wages, allowances, and benefits, 59,856,500. Capital expenditure, 32,628,600, gives a total expenditure of 164,779,900. When I first decided to run for public office, I received some advice from Charles Kernan, and his advice was, wherever you do, make sure that you can sleep at night. And there are a lot of things that needs to be said, and it seems that people are afraid to say it because they're going to lose votes, etc., etc. But I want to be able to sleep at night, so today I am going to say them. So let us go back to the numbers. 60% of this recurrent revenue is financed by a specific source. But a lot of discussion is now had about what this source that gives us 60% of the revenue is not discussed. Where does it come from? Why is not there more, etc., etc., etc.? The money is just there, and we just move along. I'm talking about the Department for International Development, DFID. There were multiple meetings last year, meetings again this year. Financial aid missions, budgetary assistance missions, fam bam, thank you ma'ams, and nothing. Madam Speaker, the question is, are the ministers of government so ineffective in their negotiating skills that nothing new has been given in terms of the recurrent budget? And if we go through the list of capital projects, and we try to find the ones that were actually financed by DFID, you're going to find something very interesting. Remember that DFID is our major, as was stated in the budget speech, our major development partner. That's the phrase that was used. But if you actually go through the capital expenditure line by line, and you compare what was done in 2017, 2018, and 2018, 2019, most of those black things are blank. So DFID Capacity Development Fund, 0. Disaster preparedness repairs, last year was 180,800. This year is still 180,800, which means it's not actually new money. It's just money that was unspent from last year and has been rolled over into this year's budget. You go through cemetery establishment, there was 100,900 last year, 7,000 last year, which means that money was spent, and it's only 7,000 remaining. There's no new money for that. Education infrastructure, blank. Government accommodation, blank. Census 2012, 157,400. This year, 99,500, which again is money that was spent from prior, so there's no new money. I'm not going to bore you, but you could go through the entire thing, and you're going to realize that there's not any new major Whatever DFID is given is minor. That will be expanded by my colleague here, so I'll just leave that. So the question is that we had a campaign where we were promised these excellent negotiation skills, and the reason why things didn't occur is because the previous administrations weren't very good at asking for stuff. That basically was the campaign. And we have to have people hold our elected members responsible for their promises and do not make excuses. If your entire campaign is based upon the fact that the previous government was not getting enough aid from DFID, and I now have the ability to do this, it is the opposition has a duty, and we as a people have a duty who voted to hold them to that promise. And we have to ask, what was the problem? Why wasn't more funds allocated? What are the hold-ups, etc.? And why are you still proclaiming that there's such a good relationship? Do we need to look at someplace else? Not just talking about looking at someplace else, but do we have to start looking at someplace else and have an honest discussion with the people of Montserrat about what went wrong? Yes, it's going to look bad to come back and say we can't get anything because of this, because the entire campaign was structured around we have that ability. But if we're actually serious about moving Montserrat forward, we have to start having these honest discussions and stop hiding. And we have reached a situation where we have normalized mediocrity. So we have all promises and no results, all big talk and no action, all blame and no outcomes. But as I said before, the residents of Montserrat deserve better. Advancing our journey to self-sustainability through strategic investment. Let's talk about what the word self-sustainability means. Because we keep hearing this word self-sustainability, self-sustainability, and I get the impression that a lot of people think that the word self-sustainability automatically means that you won't longer be poor and that you would have a lot of money. But if we just look at the plain definition of the word self-sustainability, all it means is that you have the ability to pay your bills. But the question is, what are those bills? So for example, if our aid agencies pull all funding and we only have the 50 million that we raise locally, we'll pay all our bills. All that will happen is that you will just produce less bills. You would cut salaries, you won't be able to provide services, and Montserrat will be self-sustained. But clearly that's not what we mean when we say we want Montserrat to be self-sustained by itself. We mean more than that. It's not just the word. That's not really the goal. The goal is more about a thriving economy and opportunities for people to pursue their goals and be able to have enough money, cash, to buy goods and services, to buy stuff for their children, etc. It's not just a matter of saying that we're self-sustainable. Because I said, if we only have $50 million, all that will happen is that Montserrat will become very poor. We will not be able to pay our bills, but we will be paying our own bills. So we have to be careful when we use the word self-sustainability, that we do not have this impression that it automatically means that you're going to have wealth and Montserrat is going to be rich. The goal has to be more than self-sustainability. So in the very topic of the budget speech, the government has already gone down the wrong road. It's not just about achieving self-sustainability, it's about building a thriving economy where people can have their own money, etc. Because if we just do a quick calculation making certain assumptions, our contribution to the budget is 50 million, and the total expenditure is about 160 million, which is about 3 times of what we contribute. And the Honourable Premier keeps talking about we need to grow at 5% every year. So let's assume that that's possible, even though the prediction for next year is 2.2% according to his budget speech. But say by some miracle we're able to achieve a 5% growth continuously year over year, which no country, by the way, has been able to achieve. What would it take for us to grow our economy by 3 times? How long would it take to grow our economy by 3 times if we are growing by 5% every year as we are trying to achieve? If you do the calculation making certain simplifying assumptions, you're going to realize it takes 28 years. So if we grow at that rate that the Honourable Premier said that we should go at and that which we're aiming at to become self-sustainable, it means in 28 years, 1 generation when we are old, we are going to be in a position to fund this current budget by ourselves. which means in 28 years we're still going to be in the exact same situation that we are in now, with the difference that we are paying our own bills and we have more say about how that money is spent. But in terms of actual cash in people's pocket and in terms of actual spending power and the economy, our situation would be the exact same it is now if we manage to grow at 5% every year, which means that the path that we are on cannot be the path if we are trying to get to a path of self-sustainability, which is not where we are trying to get to, a path of a thriving economy. It just cannot be doing the status quo over and over and talking about, yes, we have done contracts for verge cutting, yes, we have done some stuff for the roads, yes, we have done normal things in education that we normally do, yes, we have allocated some money to these programs, yes, we have given farmers and fishers some money. These are normal activities that government do every day and just maintain the status quo. They are nothing to boast about, and they are not strategic investments to take us towards a thriving economy. And the government should be ashamed that it is such things that they're boasting about in their presentations. It has to be more than that. We have to be able to take big and bold steps to get Montserrat to where it wants to go. So, according to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Governor, against the backdrop of rapid global and technological change, relatively low growth and high unemployment, particularly among our youth, and the recent devastation of several member countries by Hurricane Irma and Maria, nothing less than socio-economic transformation will do. End of quote. Nothing less than social economic transformation will do. Repeating the status quo will not take us where we want to go, which is why I cannot support the status quo budget. We just basically maintain what we had before. I needed to see something that gives Montserrat hope, something different about how we plan to take the country forward, apart from normal things that a standard government would have done. And instead of hearing speeches boasting about normal government procedure, instead of talking about the steps forward and what are the bold steps that are going to be taken to take Montserrat to that state. And I do not expect, Madam Speaker, that the Honourable Premier, through a budget speech or through a budget, can solve all of the problems of Montserrat right away. So let's not get that impression that I'm thinking that the Honourable Premier can present a budget and that budget is going to solve all of Montserrat problems. It's going to take a lot of hard work by the government, the opposition, the people, our outside investors, friends, family, diaspora, etc. But what I did expect was a framework laid out by the Honourable Premier that would outline how does he see these big and bold steps taking the country forward, and then to see supporting arguments by his ministers. How do they fit into that goal and that objective about taking the country forward, and not simply each minister trying to defend what their ministry is doing in order to be elected. I wanted a framework that I can see Montserrat going forward, and that the people who are out there saying that things are hard, they can't pay the bills, how will they send their children to school, etc., can have some hope. So we know that the master plan, for example, of the MDC was thrown out. It's now 4 years on. So what I expected to hear was a new plan, a new master plan, if you want to call it like that, about since that plan is no longer in play, and as the Honourable Osborne mentioned, he's not even sure what's happening to the Little Bay project. What is the replacement? You came and you met something in place, and you have a right to say you didn't like it, your government. You have a right to say that you want something different. It's 4 years on. So what is the new master plan for Montserrat economic development in Little Bay, for example? And I'm going to get to more of that when I get to the Ministry of Communication and Works. I expected to see that. We need multi-million-dollar investments. This has to be the focus if we want to jumpstart our economy and actually have catalytic activities, as was mentioned also. So all the government budget and activities have to be geared towards that goal. It cannot be a set of random activities in the capital part of the budget without a coherent part of how that money is supposed to be spent. So, for example, we know that EDF 11 is coming, has been signed, and that's $60 million. We also know that election is currently approaching. And we have to be careful, not we again, since we don't, the opposition members, the opposition don't spend money. But I keep saying we because sometimes when I listen to the presentations on the other side, the public would have the impression that the opposition is part of the decision-making apparatus of this country where they have been totally excluded despite all the talks to unity. So forgive me when I use the word we. The government have signed a contract for EDF, $60 million. Election is approaching. There always is a temptation in our governments and in regions and in politics and electioneering to use that money in such a way for electioneering purposes and not for long-term strategic investment and for growth. So, Madam Speaker, I hope that the Honourable Premier will resist the temptation and the pressure from his ministers and actually concentrate on activities that will continue the long-term growth of Montserrat and not just projects and activities that are geared towards electioneering and not towards the long-term benefit of our country. And that's one of the problems that we keep having, that we receive aid funding and instead of having the courage to invest the aid funds in such a way for the long-term development of our country, this concentration on the next election and on your seat that you do not make the right decisions for the country as a whole, and this temptation is there to make the decision on what can get you elected. So we ask for $750,000, etc., but I'm getting to that. We have to make sure that the activities that we pursue are actually for the long-term benefits of the country, and we, the opposition and the public, have to hold our members of government responsible. And the members of government have to be brave enough to go to the public and say, yes, this short-term thing might seem good, but we have made a decision to put the money into these projects because in the end it's going to be better for the long-term benefit of the country, and that's what leadership is about, the ability to face the electorate and explain to them why the decisions have been taken. So I'm hoping that EDF 11, the $60 million, would be published, not published, would be spent on such activities, and we are looking forward. And as the Honourable Husband has now said that he'll be included in the discussions, that will be included in the discussions about how that money should be spent, because I'm going to hold him to his word about unity. An article was published lately in one of our local media outlets entitled, "Is Montserrat afraid of its own greatness?" Is Montserrat afraid of its own greatness? Almost doesn't count. Madam Speaker, we cannot be afraid of our own greatness. As a simple calculation has shown, did show, we cannot continue on the path that we are on. We have to seek true catalytic investments. But for us to do that, we have to actually believe that we can achieve such things, and we have to actually believe in ourselves. Because what happens is that cowards never start. You want to do something, but you're cowards so that you never start. But if you're committed to something, no excuse is acceptable. And we are not going to make it to that goal that we want by just making excuses, but we're only going to make it by hard work. So if you're going to see what somebody is interested in, you don't look at what they say, don't look at the fancy speeches, you don't look at the fancy words, you look at what they actually do. So, Madam Speaker, the government can say that, you know what, we not really believe, for example, let's assume that they're saying, we don't really believe that we can do all these big and bold things and we can only do these small steps. We don't believe we have 200 runs to make. We don't believe that we can hit sixes, so let's concentrate on hitting singles, and we're still going to make the 200 runs just over a longer period of time. So maybe it's possible that they don't believe they have the ability to hit sixes, or maybe they're just concentrating on hitting singles. So let's look at that in this budget and what has happened over the past 4 years and what will be happening next. We need a business investment unit. We still have unfriendly procedures, archaic forms and processes, nuisance fees, multiple stops, long delay for routine decisions. These bureaucratic bottlenecks in the public service continue to frustrate the ease of pursuing business opportunities and force smaller enterprises to operate informally and suboptimally. But there was absolutely no discussion by the Minister of Trade about what will be put in place to replace these things or to alleviate some of these problems. It's been 4 years on, and simple things as just trying to make some of the procedures and processes of starting a business that can be done. There's absolutely no discussion about it. We are regaled with stories about being a child and growing tangerine and other such things. What we are interested in are the actual things that are going to move Montserrat forward. So we're talking about, let's hit singles. These are simple things that can be done, and there's absolutely no discussion about simple things like that. It is easy to use fancy phrases, and I quote, continuous and open dialogue with the private sector on critical issues for moving Montserrat forward, end of quote. Madam Speaker, in the 4 years that this administration has been in power, there has not been a single meeting with the private sector, not one. Fancy words and ideas won't move this country forward, Madam Speaker. Actions will. They have not been able to attract a single investor, not a single one. Not a single investor this government has been able to attract over the past 4 years. Not a single meeting with the private sector. This government has demonstrated over the past 4 years that it is incapable of charting a path to move Montserrat forward. They're not even playing singles, Madam Speaker. They're still practicing the forward defensive stroke. Something as simple as a page on the Government of Montserrat website that talks about investment opportunities for Montserrat is missing. Something as simple as that. I can go to businessgrenada.com and I can see all the steps I need to start a business, what taxes I would have to pay, what are the work permits, etc. Something as, again, and I'm going to repeat it, something as simple as that has not been done over the past 4 years. And it's not mentioned in this budget. There's no talk about making the business environment friendly. Or there might be talk about it, but there's no talk about the actual steps that are going to be done. We're just given excuses. And instead we keep hearing about CEOs and consultancies and consultants about more consultancies. That's all that we've been hearing about, and we have to move past that. And we have to also understand that taking pictures and putting out PR statements is not the same thing as getting things done. Nor is producing reports and plans on how to execute these plans. This is not what it means by getting things done, and it's time for this rubbish to stop. Madam Speaker, 10% of DFID's contribution to the recurrent budget is for activities that has been proven to be ineffective. And I must say it is my observation that our leaders are not leading, but they are being led. Page 57, Program 121, Human Resources, Subhead 236, Professional Services and Fees, 7,400,500 ring fence for TCEs. Training for locals, 2,833,300, and we start to see the problem of how this budget is constructed and the negotiation skills that those that we elect to represent us have produced. This area of spending has been shown over and over to not work. It is expensive. For one, this money actually comes out of our consolidated fund. And it is known that this is ineffective in building capacity and reducing poverty. And it also brings with it wrong solution based upon this erroneous assumption that London knows best. So, as I said before, it is overpriced. You have to pay the cost of living, travel, rent, and other expenses. And these are expenses that would not have been generated if instead local consultants were used. The other problem with that is that you end up with the problem that it is the donor priorities and agendas that are being implemented and not the local policies and agendas and where we want to go as a people. And that has to stop. And If there's pressure on the government to implement such things, they need to come to the people and be honest and to explain that they have no control over what is happening. Do not continuously pretend that this A team is getting things done, but you are still being placed into this straitjacket by your donor agencies. It means that you're not an A team, that at best you are D or maybe an E team. So, the other problem with consultants and this payment of money on consultants that we understand, although the UK has stated that they have a policy of untying aid. In other words, if they have a contract to do, they're free to look outside of UK companies to award these contracts to. And the UK have an official policy from their end that aid will be untied and they can look anywhere for such contracts. Yet, there's a report which shows that 80% of all DFID contracts are still given to firms in the UK. So we have a situation where consultants come to say what we need, and they give back the jobs to their people back in the UK. And I'm going to come to that again when I deal with geothermal. We have to understand as leaders and those that are in the position to say things about this, that they need to say it. It is not enough to talk about that there's an A on your report and you do not see the work to justify it. If you say that this is stopping Montserrat from moving forward, the government and the leaders that actually meet with these aid agencies, they need to come out and start saying that this is the issue that we are having and stop hiding behind the financial secretary like it's his fault why things are not moving forward and he's the one that is to be provided funding when there's a minister of finance and ministers of government that were elected to represent the people of Montserrat, and accept their responsibility and stop hiding, Madam Speaker. If I could continue on this point, a lot of evidence that show that this does not work. There's absolutely no evidence to show that consultants and TAs and technical consultants is going to make your economy grow, and it is just a waste of money. And apparently, I've checked, is 10% of the recurrent budget has gone back, that DFID provides, have gone back to an activity that we know does not work. This government must have the courage to tell the UK to stop trying to control us to the use of TCs and consultants, but let us determine our own development path. They must have the courage to tell the UK to stop implement solution design in London that have absolutely nothing to do with our local context. And they must have the courage to tell the UK does not always mean that the experts are better than theirs or that the experts have a better understanding of how to reduce poverty in our nation when we ourselves are the ones that experience it. And they must tell the UK that they need more choices about how this money is for TCs and consultancies are spent, and that the money for local capacity has to be increased. That is not reflected in the budget. We cannot be spectators in our own development. We cannot have consultants telling us what kind of hospital we need. We cannot have consultants telling us what kind of economic plan we need. And we cannot have consultants coming to tell us what kind of port that we need. This has to be led by the various ministries, and issues about the port, etc., has to be led by the Honourable Minister responsible for port, which is the Honourable Lewis, which I'm going to get to. There are two issues, two requisites for getting a nation out of poverty. And one of them that we have to have the skills and we have to have the capital. But there's an even more important criterion. We have to have the political resolve to do so. We have to actually believe that it's possible and that we can do it. Aid can work, but it can work if we have strong political institutions. So we cannot have a situation where we are stopping projects because of the administration that start them. But when we have policies and ideas that were drafted by technicians and were drafted with consultations with the relevant stakeholders, it is prudent for any incoming government to continue them. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. We are now 4 years on. And what I was asking for, I was expecting to see in this budget, after those were stopped, after the embassy was closed, after the PIU was closed, what is the replacement? We are having a problem that we are given money and we do not have the institutional capacity to make sure that this money is spent fully, which is why we keep having this issue of some of the capital projects being rolled over, etc., when it doesn't have to be, when we're having the issue of 45% of our capital project is unspent, and various reasons were given, which I'm coming to. But we need to put the institutional capacity in place to do that. There's no place in this budget that talk about a project development. If you don't want to use the word project implementation, use it. A project implementation division. If we are given millions of dollars and you cannot spend it, it will be prudent to at least spend $500,000 to put something in place so that you have the ability to spend millions of dollars to put back into the economy. There's still no discussion about a replacement from that. For that unit, we just keep hearing, as the young people will say, shade being thrown at this unit without a concrete plan going forward about its replacement. So it's all well and good to play political games and blame the administration, the previous administrations, instead of accepting responsibility 4 years on for your failures. But if we want this country to move forward, this government will have to come and apologize to the people for their failures and explain to them how do they actually plan to rectify the mistakes that they have made. This is what they have made. This is what adults do. What children do is make excuses about why things didn't happen. What adults and grown-up do is to say, apologize, yes, we have made mistakes, and this is how we plan to fix it. I did not hear any of that, and I'm hoping on Tuesday that when the Honorable Premier gives his response, maybe he failed to omit it in his speech on Monday, that we will see these details about what is happening going forward. Education, youth, sports, and community services. Again, I wish to congratulate the Honourable Minister for her work that she has done in social services and the various things that she has put in place, and those things were needed. But we have to understand that as adults, because we are friendly or because you have done something great, it does not also mean that you could not have done better. It does not mean that some of the things that you are doing are wrong. It does not mean when somebody points it out to you that is a personal issue or that they grudge-minded or bad-minded or crab in the barrel and these phrases that we love to use to hide our ineffectiveness. It means that we are adults and we are having a conversation and a debate about how things should be and how we think things are not. And it is always disgraceful, and it's something when I used to teach I don't expect my students to do. So it seems strange to me that grown adults are engaged in this kind of behavior, that the moment somebody questions what they do is because they have something against you. It is possible that people have genuine disagreements in the way that things are going forward, and we have to be mature enough to, in our discourse, to understand that, yes, some of the things that we do can be wrong. It takes a certain arrogance to believe that everything you do is so perfect that the moment somebody questions it is because they have some personal issues with you. We are human beings and we all make mistakes, and we must be able to take criticisms. So there was a marathon session by the Honorable Ryan, but what I failed to gather from the session is what are the plans going forward? What are the plans for the new hospital? What are the plans for education? What are the plans for the new school? We have a situation where we have children being educated in T1 11 buildings, way out on a field that when it rains you can't get through to. There was no discussion on that. We have a situation there's not enough lab equipment and enough equipment at the various schools. There was no discussion on that. If we're talking about strategic investments, as I said at the beginning, it is the investment in people. So I should have been hearing a lot of discussion concerning those very aspects when it comes to education and the education of our citizens, and how do we plan to develop local capacity? How do we plan to educate people? What are we putting in place for when the fiber optic cable comes? As there are the new spends for a computer science teacher. There's none, by the way. There's no this, so we're going to bring fiber optics and we're going to revolutionize Montserrat, but we're not going to train our people to be able to program. We are going to do the same status quo thing that we are doing. Send them to secondary school, they do ICT, which is Word, Excel. When we talk about ICT and businesses, we don't mean training people to do Word and Excel. These are things that we expect people to be able to do in this modern age. We're talking about hard things and the real things like computer science, etc. So where was the discussion about putting things into education to fix when the ICT cable comes that there's something for our children to do? We also discussion about after club activities for the students in terms of ICT, etc. And I'm saying this ICT specifically because it's tied back to the 5 fundamental pillars that the government proposed as taking Montserrat forward. And the point I'm making, we are saying that we are getting this capital investment for fiber optics, and I'm coming to that also. Where are the things that are being put in place to take advantage of it? There are a lot of fancy words which were put in this budget to mask the fact that all we have is a standard budget that any government would have produced, and there's nothing to be praiseworthy about. I'm not tapping anybody on the back for doing what is expected of them. You have to go beyond what is expected for me to give you any kind of praise. Not for doing what any government would have done anyway. Nothing different would have changed. Girls in ICT Day would have happened. The ICT Council would have happened. All the standard activities would have happened. There's nothing unique or special or revolutionary in this budget that credit should be given to. And I will not be giving credit for doing standard things. So we heard statements and all kind of statistics about 38% of the boys in primary school in grade 3 are performing to where they're supposed to perform, but 69% of the girls are overperforming. But not overperforming. 69% of the girls are performing at the standard that they should be. But what I didn't hear, based upon that you know that this is the problem, and based on the fact that you have been in the ministry for 4 years, what actual plans were put in place to rectify this situation? What plans were put in place to get our education system to the point where it's modern to where we want to be? The public has to remember, and this Honourable House has to remember that this government was elected last year. This is the 4th budget. So when you come into a situation and look at the educational system, and I assume that you have some idea of where you want to take the country and the priorities that you have, and that you will start to gear your education policies and programs, etc., towards achieving that goal. It's 4 years on, and the secondary school is exactly, and the primary schools, and etc., exactly how they were before. So when we talk about strategic investments for something self-sustainability, how do we actually plan to do it? There's no need, Madam Speaker, to learn the exact words because they're just words. They really have no meaning. It's just something that is said because it sounds good or somebody tells them that they should say it, or whatever reason, I don't really know. But there's nothing actually in the budget to show that they're serious about this. And I'm making sure that I mention 4 years because we must remember that this administration is not new. This is not their new budget. They cannot use the excuse now that they're green and they didn't know and they met problems and they're trying to fix this problem. It's 4 years on, and it's time to get on with the business of the people. We also saw a headline when I was doing some research that the Honourable Premier has pledged support to local athletics. So it's just a simple statement. All I would like him to do is to explain on Tuesday exactly how this support is materialized in the budget. Because it's all well and good to take pictures and to, when our athletes do good or demonstrations do good, to go and try to associate ourselves with these things so that we also look good when we actually had nothing to do with the activity. So I'm going to get to that $750,000 also. We have to make sure that when we talk about helping people, that is actually reflected in the budget. So all I would like the Honourable Premier to do is when he comes back to answer questions and give his comments on Tuesday, exactly how this support would be materialized in the budget, and do not give young people expectations that you can't meet. If you know you can't meet it, leave it alone and talk about something else. I saw money was to be expended for police investigative. Money is to be expended for the police to obtain vehicles and other different commissioners, etc. And it would be nice if more money can be expended for the police to have an investigative unit into domestic violence. And that's something I will support TCs and outsiders coming into, because it seems that we do not want to face that problem. So maybe the Honourable Premier needs to write a letter to His Excellency the Governor, since he is responsible for the police, with the support of the opposition, to try to get an investigative unit to investigate such issues as plaguing our society. My colleague here will deal with the hospital issue, but I need to mention something. That there was a cabinet decision, and we must remember again that the decisions are made by cabinet. We have the talk about unity and hypocrisy, etc. The decision was made by cabinet to obtain a new site for the hospital. So it was cabinet of the Honourable Lewis, the Honourable Hogan, the Honourable Ryan. My friend, the Honourable Osborne, wasn't there at that time, but I would assume he had some input on the decision as part of the team, to move the hospital from its current site to a new green site, and that has stalled the project. It's tempting to try to go into the reasons why that was done, but I'm going to leave that and move on. But that has stalled the project, and I did not get enough clarity from the minister about how they plan to move that project forward. And we have to be, the government has to be careful that when they make decisions, that the decisions are made in the best interest of the country and not for other reasons. And they must be held responsible for such things. Our hospital is not a joke. It is not something to be playing politics with, and there needs to be clear, concise statement from cabinet and those that were elected to represent us and do make decisions on our behalf, talking about the current administration, the government, about what the true situation is and what do we want. It cannot be that the only person that I'm hearing about talking about the hospital is the Honourable Ryan, who did some consultancies on it and have met with the public. It is not just an issue for the Honourable Ryan, it is an issue for also the Honourable Lewis, it is an issue for the Honourable Osborne and the Honourable Willock. Those are the ones that I see in front of me, and the Honourable Premier. Is also an issue for the members of the opposition, and I need to get some clarity. I guess the Premier will respond on Tuesday, and not that it has gone back to PAHO to look at, etc. Like, what is the government's, what is the local view, what is it that they want? As I mentioned before, we cannot keep dependent upon outside consultants to tell us what do we want. We have to start saying this is what we want and come back to the people, this is what we asked for, this is what the aid agency says, this is how the negotiations went, this is how fees might have to change in order to accommodate what we want and have honest discussions, but it seems like we don't want to do that for whatever reasons. The other part that you see that I was pleased to see in the program under the Ministry of Education, Health and Community Services, Subhead 4.0, an EU fund for a youth program of $750,000. And again, I'm going to start off by congratulating the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for thinking about such a program, because unemployment of youth is a problem and programs must be put in place to help them. We just have to make sure that the program is run to actually do its purpose. And there's a reason why when we set up our government systems that we have separated the actual politicians from the implementation of the projects. That is generally how it is done in the interest of transparency and accountability, etc. To avoid, not to say that it happens, but to avoid certain temptations, we normally set up our systems with 3 branches of government, and we also set up our structures so that when money is to be spent, it is not directly spent by the civil servants, but it is spent, it is not directly spent by politicians, but it is spent by civil servants, etc., who are tasked with the job of doing a purpose. So we have to make sure that the things that we set up are done in such a way. And I heard the Honourable Premier mention that the program will now be carried back under the Ministry of Youth, and if that's what he plans to do, and if he holds true to that decision, I will congratulate him, but I will wait to see what happens in the committee stage. The program should be under the Ministry of Youth, who are tasked with, that is the Ministry of Youth, that is exactly what they were set up to do. That is why they were paid to do the job. It is the job of politicians to raise revenue and to raise funds, to come up with policy and to assign such monies to the relevant departments, and they do the spending. So I'm looking forward to make sure that that is fixed. We also have to be careful about the justification for certain things and whether the money is spent correctly. So, what was the youth unemployment before? There's no number given. What's the current youth unemployment figures after? No numbers are given. So how do you know if something is working? What are you comparing it to? Saying that this random person got a job does not mean that the program is working effectively. And if you have a situation that, if you're boasting about, let's go back carefully through this, so that we understand what I'm trying to say. If you're saying that we have a youth program to reduce unemployment, and the government is boasting that more people are joining this program, there's a problem. It means that if unemployment was going down, it means that people will be leaving the program. It does not mean that more people will be joining the program. And if more people are joining the program, it means there's a fundamental problem in the economy of Montserrat, that people are not finding jobs. This is not something that you should be boasting about. It's something that you should be sad about. This is something that should make you not sleep at night, and it's not something that you should be congratulating yourself about. You're saying that the economic situation is such that the young people of Montserrat cannot find jobs, so the most I can do for them is to give them $1,000 a month. What's $1,000 a month? What they actually want is a growing economy and a program that actually does that. So if the Honorable Parliamentary Secretary is boasting that more and more people every year are joining his program, this is not something to be happy about. This is something to be sad about. And if every year, remember the money is capped at $750,000. So if every year new children are leaving the secondary school, and the current people cannot find jobs to come out the program, and new people are coming into the program, at some point the program is going to fail because there's not enough money to it. So the program has to be set up in a way that the young people actually develop skills that they can be employed in. And that has to be shown, and those numbers need to be given. Ministry of Communication, Works and Labour. If the Honourable Madam Speaker, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary is saying that his program is such a success, it is very strange to me why he would choose in his budget presentation to mention activities that had nothing to do with his program. One would think that to show the effect and the success of his program, that he would have chosen activities that were directly related to his program, and that activities that young people have spent their toil, their own money, with absolutely no assistance from the government, even though it was asked in terms of duty-free concessions to set up a project, to spend their time from October to now working on the project, to have the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary responsible for youth getting up, trying to align himself with the project, when the project itself, the students in the project did not learn any of the skills that they're using from his thing, and the project had absolutely nothing to do with it. That's a disgrace, and the fact that he was cheered on by the members on his side is also a disgrace. We cannot be trying to take credit for the work of young people for political gain. I'm not saying, which is what it appears to me. Maybe it's not that. And if he's saying on the other side that his program is so successful, I would have thought that he would have chosen things from his program to demonstrate, and not trying to take credit for the hard work of other young people, and I found that utterly disgraceful. Ministry of Communication, Work and Labour. Let's start with the port, because that's what the big discussion is about. And let's start by saying that I have families with businesses and friends with businesses that depend upon containers coming in. I do understand the situation that if a container comes in, a boat comes in and the sea is rough, that it cannot be docked. I have family and friends and other people with various retail businesses that stand to lose thousands and tens of thousands of dollars when this occurs, and it does occur, and it is a direct monetary loss to some people that I'm close to. So this idea, this Truman argument that was put forward by the Honourable Minister that there are those talking don't want a breakwater and that there are those that don't want these things, although we have not spoken about the budget yet. As I said, there's something called a Truman argument. Or that I have personal reasons why I would want to see the breakwater done. I have business reasons why I would want to see the breakwater done. So we must understand that when I make comments about the breakwater, and I'm using the word breakwater and not port, that I want to see the breakwater done, it is not because of some personal issue with the minister or some personal trying to make some political point. It is trying to understand what is the best situation for Montserrat. So, in 2015, David Cameron came to the Caribbean. He set up a £300 million fund, the UK CIF fund, £300 million. This money was put to the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, for 8 countries to have access to, Montserrat being one of those countries. So there was 300, let's remember those numbers. There were £300 million that was given by David Cameron, the then Prime Minister of England, when he came to the Caribbean on his visit. This money was deposited in the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank, for these 8 countries to access, Montserrat being one of them, for infrastructure projects, and there were certain other rules that applied to it for infrastructure projects. These 8 countries were Belize, which got £42.4 million, Dominica, which got £25.7 million, Grenada, which gets £23.2 million, Guyana, which got £53.2 million, Jamaica, which got £53.2 million, Antigua, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, £28 million, Antigua and Barbuda, £13.9 million, and finally Montserrat, £14.4 million. We're going to realize out of the list of 8 countries, Montserrat got the second least allocation. So there was £300 million given for infrastructure projects throughout the Caribbean, and only Antigua and Barbuda, which £13.9 million, got less than Montserrat, which got £14.4 million. I am not, let's be careful here, I'm not saying that we are not happy for the £14.4 million. I would just like to ask the question, what happened to the great negotiation skills that caused Montserrat to get the second least allocation? We must also ask ourselves that there was an MDC master plan that had a whole structure of how we wanted things to take place. And it was not said because from the tone of the presentation, there was some joy about what was given. So I do not know, and I guess it would have to be explained, was monies asked for to fund the Casby project, which now could have been put with money from the EDF 11 funds to actually do something greater? Or was there some impediment why this was only the amount of money allocated to Montserrat? Because we, as I said at the beginning, we have to think big and bold, and we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we are trying to achieve? Are we just giving in to public sentiment, or are we looking at the long-term benefit for Montserrat? It is possible that Montserrat would not have been allocated anymore, and if that's the case, then we look forward to having our breakwater soon. We were also told that DFID is the one that's now handling the procurement and the management of the geothermal exploration for Well 3, and that there are currently negotiations between DFID and IDC. I was also told in the presentation that there's a 1 megawatt solar project coming online, which will put Montserrat 40%, I think, onto renewable energy. And I was also told in that presentation that it costs $13 million to do the 1 megawatt plant, and that is far cheaper than geothermal. So it's just, I mean, when I thought about it, if we can get 40% for $13 million, and that's 40% of the grid, and it is far cheaper, what is the actual policy reasons for pursuing geothermal continuing? If you say there's a cheaper way to send Montserrat green and there's a cheaper way to get us off of fossil fuel, and it can be done through solar, etc., through that 1 megawatt plant, and it is cheaper than geothermal, it is possible, as I said, this is possible. There might be reasons why this is done, but it begs the question, if we have a cheaper way and funding is being given for these activities, why are we still pursuing geothermal? I was also told in the presentation that there's public-private partnership is being sought to do the geothermal projections. We also told through the presentation that both wells that have been dug, plus are giving you about 2 point something megawatts, and the third well, if we assume it gives the same, it takes us to about 5 megawatts. But we have to be very careful here. We are saying that we are doing a solar project for 1 megawatt. You're asking a private investor to come in, but you have already, remember, this private investor at some point have to recoup their money. We use about 2 megawatts. You have removed 1 megawatt out of the system by doing solar, which means there's only 1 megawatt of capacity left for the private investor to sell to. You can sell to 2 megawatts of power to people to recover your money. The government is doing a 1 megawatt solar project, which is going to remove 1 megawatt of capacity that the private investor through geothermal have to produce. Is it enough incentive now to get a private investor? Is there a coherent plan or how we are pursuing our green energy policy, or are we only doing things because money was allocated and we need to do it without thinking clearly and straight through what will be the effect of such a thing? And it's a very serious consideration. The market of Montserrat is already very small, and if we're saying that we're removing 1 megawatt of capacity to government investment to do this part, what incentive would a private investor come to build a multi-million-dollar geothermal plant to only produce 1 megawatt of capacity? And that policy needs to be thought about and to understand clearly where we need to go to geothermal. It's not that I'm against you, Mr. Lewis. We're still going, Honorable Lewis, sorry, Madam Speaker. Not that I'm against the Honorable Lewis. We're still going to have lunch afterwards. But we need to have a clear understanding of how these things are happening, not because, Madam Speaker, I have personal issues with the Minister, but because I have these concerns and I would like to see them resolved. So I see them, the ministers are now talking. Finally, I've done something that could not have been done before. I've gotten them on the same page. So that they'll discuss on Tuesday how do they plan to do that. You all need to thank me and to pay for lunch today. Madam Speaker, the next part come under that ministry is the fiber optic, and we have to understand again that this project has been promised for a long time, has been started, has been stopped. We have been told that there are discussions about modalities for the execution of the subsea fiber project, etc., etc. We have been told that public-private partnerships have been sought. We have been told that tenders have gone out, etc., etc. But it is the reality that the private sector do not see this project as one that's commercially viable, fiber optic. So I would hope that whatever modalities they're talking about, that something can actually happen. There was not enough detail given about why, how far along are they, what is the funding agencies actually saying, are we really going to get it? And then my concern has always been is that after you get it, what do you plan to do with it? So that's what I would like to see from that ministry. Well, not just directly the Ministry of Communication and Work, but the other ministries like Education, etc. How will it tie back into getting a fiber optic cable and that there's activities surrounding it. The other part that was talked about was the vehicle licensing system that was done, and that came out of a project that the Honourable Minister did, a 1.3 million ICT project that he did on the vehicle licensing system came out of it, and that was a very good result from that project, and I must congratulate the team who executed that project, and again the Minister for having that idea. But he also made a very important statement when he was trying to justify why the capital projects roll over from year to year, and that sometimes the money roll over because it is, he used the word be sensible. It is not sensible to be paying people for a project if it's not finished as yet. That was the phrase that was used. And there were a lot of other projects. This was one project that came out properly, and there were a lot of other projects that funds were expended for, and it would be nice if, again, if the Premier and his team can put pressure on the people that are responsible for these projects to deliver, because there are a lot of money of public funds that were spent, and some of them are not. I could understand if businesses fail. It's possible to put money into a startup and the startup fail. But if money is given to enterprises to produce a specific, tangible service or a specific tangible product, it must be delivered. Whether the person is your friend or family or supporter, it does not matter. Public funds were expended for various projects under this ICT scheme, and a lot of them are tangible products that should have been delivered, and a lot of them are tangible services that should have been delivered, and they have not been, and people have received payments for them. I do not want to go into details of what these products are, but it is up to the Honourable Lewis, as a representative of the people, to make sure that these funds are spent properly, and I will be checking later on to make sure that if people receive money to produce services for the government, that these things are done. So I will leave that there. Honourable Premier, on page 5 of the estimates, 206,120, there's a bank levy of $1.5 million. I would just like to point this out, because some honourable members last time claimed I did not know about it. So I would just like to point out that the bank levy is in the budget, and I would like to point out that they will be voting on the budget, and I would also like to point out that there will be a committee stage where they have the ability to move items in the budget. So I do not expect to hear moving on that they were not aware of the bank levy charge. It is on page 5, 206,120 of the budget estimates, and they will act accordingly. What I found was a general lack of information in the budget in terms, normally if you're doing a budget, you expect to hear things like, what was the growth rate last year? I hear the projected growth rate. What was the unemployment numbers for Montserrat in general? How does that break down by the various sectors in terms of youth, women, middle class, lower class, the rich? How does unemployment look? How has it changed over the course of your term? How have the unemployment numbers changed? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Which sectors have improved? Not just the numbers, but there's an unemployment rate which is generally part of our budget. We keep talking about the diaspora. You have made various visits to the diaspora, Honourable Premier, Madam Speaker. What are the remittance numbers? How much money do we get back in remittance, etc., etc.? Those numbers were missing. We hear again a lot of fancy talk and a lot of things that are done for political gain, about things are hard and the duty on things are too high. And in fact, during the PDM campaign, it was promised that cost of living is too high, and one of the ways to do it is to modify tariffs, etc. It's been 4 years in, and that's something that the Honourable husband was championing when he was in a previous administration, and it's something he has been championing still for 4 years. Is he just talking? Does this cabinet does not respect his opinion? Is he an outsider? Why is it that tariffs have not been modified, or is it something that we say to make people feel that we're going to do something when we actually have no control over it? And if you have no control over the tariffs because of pressure from external agencies, then it is appropriate to stop promising people modifying the tariffs when you know you cannot do it. It is electioneering. What exactly, in general, has been put in place for businesses? We talk about targeted investments, and I heard a lot of talking by government ministers how they plan to spend money. I plan to spend this money, I plan to spend this money, let the FS give me more money, I hope the Premier gives me more money, I plan to spend money, I plan to spend money. We're talking about economic growth, which is about generating money. I need to hear how do we plan to generate money. If you say the private sector is the engine of growth, what specific exemptions are done? What's the modification to company taxes, if any? What's the modification to port duties and things that happen at the port? Are there tax breaks? Are there any policy decisions that are going to be made? Are there specific industries that you're targeting? Is it agriculture? Is it tourism? Is it ICT? You cannot do all. Which ones is this government going to concentrate on and say some kind of policy, whether 5 years tax break, whether duty-free concessions, whether a tech center, entrepreneurship center, what specifically would be done for these businesses? I did not get that from your presentation or from any of the presentation. The other thing I found strange from the presentations is discussions on culture and people and art and how do we expect this to be progressed. Apart from the complaint that some of the members want more power to execute things their own way and they don't like how the current technicians are doing it, there was no positive discussion about what do we plan to do for culture and art and something that actually makes a society not just roads and bridges, etc. It's also about people and families having some place to go and feeling safe, etc. There was not enough discussion or no discussion about how do we plan to invest, strategic investment into people going forward. There was hardly any discussion about St. Patrick's. When St. Patrick's was there was a lot of hoopla about it's the biggest thing that Montserrat have seen and that it gives $6 million to our economy. Are those numbers accurate? What is the contribution to St. Patrick's to the actual Montserrat economy? What's the contribution to the 6 festivals that banded about to Montserrat economy? What's the actual economic impact? Not the hype that we hear, but what's the actual economic impact? Is the investment in St. Patrick's enough? Is the committee that's running it the right one? Should it be on the technicians? Should it be given back to the parliamentary secretary? Did they go over budget? Why did they go over budget? What was the reason for this? If we're saying that, as I said, I don't know if these numbers are true, I don't have access to that information, and our Premier should. If you're saying that it contributes $6 million to our economy, should there be a case for increasing the budget, or should not there be? And there's some kind of discrepancy about this boasting about more and more people coming and the actual numbers that I see in the actual estimates. Because if I look at the embarkation tax for 2017, 2018, it was $400,000. So that's the money paid by the people. To give you an idea about how many people coming in and out. So 2017, 2018, it was $400,000. But the estimates for 2019 is less. It's 389,600, which means there had to be some prediction that the numbers for this year are less. If you're saying that more and more people are coming for festivals, why is it that the revenue predicted from embarkation tax is lower than the one before? So is it just hype to boast about things, or is there actually some kind of substance behind what is being said? And I heard the Honorable Minister for Housing mention that something will be done for lookout for Western housing. That has been in the budget from since 2014, 393,200, and it has kept roll over. So maybe it is good, as some people have predicted that election is coming soon, so that money will be spent. So hopefully the people of Lookout will be seeing something from that. Yeah. And I know that my honorable partner here, Brother Easter, will deal with that housing, etc. But what I just find interesting is this. In the presentation on housing, there's a lot of About the unity talk and the stories of childhood, which I didn't understand the relevance of, what the Honorable Easton here did not do while he was the minister, why we are in these problems that we are in now. And I maybe forgot, maybe the Honorable member did not remember that he was a member of his, maybe he's not part of the A team, maybe he's part of the B team, who was the minister before him. He was a member of this administration who was there for 3 years prior to him. So if there are things that are not being done, we have to take response, not we again, because I'm getting confused by the Honorable husband who keeps saying we. The government, the administration that's making decisions on behalf of the people of Montserrat, they need to start taking responsibility. It was his colleague that was the minister before. So if he said he did not come and make the right things in place, he knows which number to call. But my honorable member here would deal with that ministry. The final, I'm getting close to the end. We are also told that this government was good in their fiscal management because for the recurrent part, they did not, they underspent by only $7,000. But we must also remember in the presentation that DFID held back $1.5 million. And if you think back, that $1.5 million correspond to the raise that was given by this administration. Was this done as a punishment for going against the instructions given to them, that if you give this raise, you will not get that money, and we are taking it back? Maybe the Honorable Minister of Finance can explain, was that occurred? Was that the reason for no capital project? Has the relationship broken down between the government and the funding agencies? We were also told that $14.95 million was spent out of an allocated amount of $32 million, and that the storms were to be blamed, Irma and Maria, that came through in the September of last year. But we as a people must understand what is happening so that we can find solutions and what's exactly happening. We must think back and ask what else happened in September, October of last year when the storms were happening. It was around this very time which the A team and the unity callers, the unity supporters, were trying to remove the Honorable Premier from office. It was around that time when that occurred. It was around that time where one of the ministers was reassigned from his seat and a new minister was placed into that position. It was at that time where a lot of discussions were taken about around the island, who is going to be the next premier, etc., etc. From then onwards, we have realized that there has been an inability to get anything done. We have realized there's an inability to spend money. And we must ask ourselves, is this because cabinet itself is not functioning? Is it because the ministers themselves are not united? Is this the reason why? And if this is the reason why, I'm calling upon the government to get the act together. They are claiming that they are together, all of them in their presentation. If that is the case, then they need to get together. But it is surprising that all of them came in red yesterday without the Honorable Premier. And it's also surprising that today the Honorable Premier came in red and the rest of them are not in red. So I'm actually not sure how the coordination is working. So it was at the same time when the hurricanes were being blamed for the lack of progress, is around the same time when the government itself has disbanded into its separate units. And again, I'm calling on them to get the act together so that we can get this country moving forward. And hoping that this call for unity starts with the government. Then after they get the act together, I'm waiting, and my colleague here is waiting for the invitation from the government to be part of their discussions going onward, and I would keep reminding them of this. Madam Speaker, we cannot keep being sheep. At some time we have to be the lion. We can't just be just another brick in the wall, and we cannot keep expecting people to give us things. We have to go out and get them. We have to get tough, and we have to stop complaining. It is failures that keep complaining, people that actually care about success, they go out and do things and they get to working, they don't get to complaining. Anytime you see an institution and the people in the institution have reached a stage where every failure is outside of their purview, it is not their fault you're having problems. It means that, one, that they have failed. It means, two, they have not accepted responsibility for their failure. And if you have not accepted responsibility for your failure, how do you expect to rectify it? So this government, as I said at the beginning, needs to accept responsibility for their failure, apologize to the people of Montserrat, and come back with a completely new speech on Tuesday about how they plan to get things done, because this budget cannot do it. We cannot keep accepting everything as normal as how it used to be, and we cannot keep accepting that because we have 5,000 people that we cannot get things done. We have to do better than that. So it brings me great sadness when I realize what's happening to our country. We are drifting on an ocean of uncertainty. With no land in sight to bring stability, the captain has abandoned his duty, and the crew members are too afraid to mutiny. Funds to develop local capacity gone to pay TC. There is talk of self-sustainability, but policy betrays their naivety. I thank you, Madam Speaker.